There is a strange and potent power in our ability to suspend our disbelief. There are certain things we do, fully expecting them not to work, but we do them anyway. The tingling thrill we experience is when we disregard the rational and embrace insanity. If such and such is possible, well, so is anything. The issue is, can we mistake what appears to be the safely impossible and stumble inadvertently into the grim truth? Hey y'all, I'm not so used to this Reddit stuff. I'm not even sure if this is the right place to post. The thing is, I don't know where else to turn to. Nobody believes me, or they think I'm LARPing or crazy or something. I don't want some moron to just play along and reply with some nonsense in the comments. I actually need help from someone who knows what the hell they're doing. If I am something, it's that I'm desperate. So here goes, another roll of the dice. Here's my story. I was the administrator for a getaway club in our university. Basically, it was just a place for students with a flair for adventure. In other words, we'd scrape together what little spare money we had, put it in a pot, and go away for a few days here and there when the studying and partying wasn't so intense. I ended up being elected the club's admin because I had a weird talent, or that's what my mate said, for finding unusual things. I'd land on the places or activities nobody saw coming, so I brought out the sense of going on an adventure. Either that, or nobody else could be bothered with the job and I was the muppet who got landed with the paperwork. One weekend, I was sitting in front of my laptop stressing the hell out. The next big adventure was to be in a month, and I hadn't booked anything. In fact, I hadn't even got a location in mind. I was suffering a very serious case of creativity block and nowhere was coming to me. It was sort of like my brain was constipated. Terrible feeling, I hated it. I was just about to slam my laptop shut and head to bed, consigning that wasted evening to the bin, when my cat Josie jumps up on the shelf, and with that look which said that she knew exactly what she was doing, she runs along it and knocks all the books down, showering me in earmarked paperbacks. I had a good stomping rant at the cat, who jumped down and settled on the bed, giving me the "don't look at me, I didn't do it" eyes. Now having to do an angry ranting cleanup, where I'm convinced I invented at least 6 new swear words, I began gathering up the books. I was nearly finished when I lifted one which I had used the previous semester for a paper about rural life in England. The book had fallen open on a picture of a flat-topped hill, surrounded by green fields and quaint cottages. A heavy mist nestled on the plateau like a judge's wig. That was when inspiration struck. I needn't have worried about disappointing the gang, because by the departure date, not only did we have a destination, but we had a hired coach, a large marquee, numerous tents, and even a massive rechargeable battery to plug in lights and our precious smartphones. This unexpected windfall of gear came from a successful application to the National Lottery Fund, where I bigged up how young people don't get out enough and appreciate the outdoors. They practically begged for me to take their money, and I did not say no. The coach ride was a good 4 hours long, and then the hike, with us all laden down with the heaviest backpacks we'd yet carried, was absolutely brutal. My boyfriend, Bart, did nothing but moan the entire way, telling us all every time he felt a new blister on his feet popping up. His best mate, Ahmed, seemed unusually forlorn, and he ended up on average 500 meters ahead of the rest of us, walking by himself. By the time we got to the top, we were all really tired and grouchy, and the process of setting up the marquee, tents and the like resulted in a few fatigue-related spats between friends and couples in the group. But when it was all done, and the 20-something plus crowd of us had settled down with a drink in hand, all quarrels were forgotten. When everyone was chilled and happy, and I was content that everything was safe and in line with guidelines, I had to make a report to the National Lottery Fund about how I conducted the affair, so everything was triple checked. I got up and made my speech. At that point I was 3 drinks in, and so I had entirely forgotten what I was going to say, so I just climbed on top of a rock, enjoying the feeling of the late evening summer sun on my back, and yelled out, "Welcome to Pendle Hill, witch capital of the world. Or Lancashire at least." The gang raised their glasses and howled, "Hey!" Barry, the mousy-haired kid from Devon, chimed in, "Blimey, it's Halloween in June." "Where can we take a dump?" Hilbert called out. "How many beers did we bring?" Charlotte asked. "My hay fever's playing up," Kitty complained. At that point, the crowd had relaxed back into chatter amongst itself, and I was left, quite ignored on the rock. "Good job, babe," Bart said. "At least we know the party's not going to be a damp squib." I took a moment then just to take in my surroundings. It was mostly typical, flat English hilltop terrain. Besides the breathtaking view of the surrounding countryside, the only break in the grassy hilltop was a round circle of stones about 10 meters away from our camp. When I was researching this place as a destination, I discovered that it was called the Devil's Apronful, and was some sort of Bronze Age burial site. Of course, there was the whole Pendle witch trials too. Nobody worried over the history. Knowing something spooky had happened in the place was enough for them all to feel this wasn't just some camping trip on some random hill. "Oi, Raquel, those shots won't do themselves," yelled my bestie Juliana. I told her I was coming, and I went over and joined the party. Unsupervised, with outdoor heat lamps and nobody to complain about the noise, we really let loose. Mark's chunky Bluetooth speakers could be felt thumping through the ground, and drinks and snacks were flowing freely. Barry, shirtless and unsteady, came by carrying a drink while a few of us were having a dance. "Let's get hammered on the National Lottery's dime," he cooed, then got down on his knees and let out a howl like a wolf. "You're a right clunker, mate," Bart said, rolling his eyes. "Oh, you think so?" he replied, getting up and throwing one arm around him. "What about Ahmed?" That gave me pause. What about Ahmed indeed? He was usually the life of the party, the quickest wit and the most charming smile. But I'd basically heard nothing from him all day. Where even was he? Barry pointed to somewhere outside the tent. Squinting, I saw the outline of his distinctive, well-kept beard. He was slowly walking in circles around the Devil's Apronful. "What's gotten into him?" I asked. Before anyone could respond, Juliana came up behind me and pushed something into my hand. Some Molly. That, combined with the fact that the next song that came on was one of my favourites, we were swept back up into the party, and entirely forgot about Ahmed. As the night went on, and the feeling of the stimulants were pumping through us, the party got hot. "Give us a snog," Bart said to me. Things got a bit wild for a few hours, but after we'd all burnt out, most of us were sitting in our chairs. Some were still dancing, but most others were now just enjoying the atmosphere, soaking up the vibes of contentment and pleasant drunkenness. As it was now very dark, and the multicoloured disco bulb thing Juliana brought with her had run out of battery, the atmosphere took on a slightly creepier tone. This did not go unnoticed, and soon people were swapping their silly ghost stories and trying their best at giving each other jump scares. Personally, I'm not much into that, and cuddling up so close to Bart had me thinking on other things. Saying he was getting chilly, he threw a sleeping bag over the two of us, and we pretended to be enraptured by the conversation. Subtly, Bart reached over under the sleeping bag and started being rather distracting. I was forced to limit my responses to questions to and as I was having to resist making any other noises. When I had reached a conclusion, I looked out of the marquee to avoid making eye contact with anyone in case they noticed how my eyes went out of focus and rolled into the back of my head. I noticed something out there in the blackness beyond the camp. It was broken by what looked like a campfire. Huddled alongside it was a familiar silhouette. It was Ahmed. Just what was he doing? The curiosity and strangeness of it really brought the mood down for me, so I reached under and pushed Bart's hand away. He gave me a "what gives" expression. I shook my head and said I'd be back in a moment. I got up and mumbled "bathroom" to the gang and walked out into the darkness. Ahmed didn't give any sign that he noticed me walking up to him until I was effectively already there. When he turned around, he seemed mildly surprised to see me, as if it had been me who had been among the missing the entire time. "You got dragged through a hedge?" he asked in his intoxicatingly low, confident voice. Not sure what he meant, I looked down. I squeaked in embarrassment. The top button of my shorts was undone, and a bit of my underwear was sticking out on one side, and a portion of my tank top was stuffed into the other. I quickly turned around and made myself presentable. Then I sat on the blanket beside him. He gave me his famous smile, but for once it didn't meet his dark, glassy eyes. "Did Bart break up with you?" I teased. "You've been huffing out here for ages." His pretense at a smile failed, and he looked into the crackling fire that he had made for himself. He brought out a flask of water and took a sip. He seemed to be thinking hard about something. "All right, I'll go back if you're just going to ignore me," I said, feeling a little irritated. "I think we made a mistake coming here," he finally said, tucking his chin into his kneecaps as if he were trying to become as small as possible. "What? Why?" I asked, genuinely taken off guard. I thought everything up to that moment had gone better than okay. "We've ticked something off," he said, wringing his hands with anxiety. I looked at him and just blinked like an owl. I'd never seen Ahmed be anything but calm and collected. By having a party and all that, it made something angry. "Made what angry?" I implored him, hearing the sincerity in his voice. "The thing that lives in there." He pointed to the stone circle. "Oh, I get it now," I said with more sarcasm than was necessarily needed. "One of your feelings." In recent months, Ahmed had been getting big into the occult, thanks to his maternal grandmother who was somewhat of a fortune teller. It was always jarring when he brought this stuff up, as it seemed to contrast so uncomfortably with the rest of his personality. In nearly every way, he took after his dad's side, but it seems he had more nut job in his blood than you'd think. "Don't be like that, Raquel," he said, standing up and looking agitated. "By getting smashed up here, we disrespected the burial. I've been burning sage to appease them." I sighed and shook my head. I figured that perhaps antagonizing him further was not the wisest approach. "Okay, how do you know we disturbed them?" He always referred to the spirits his grandmother taught him about with generic pronouns. He never says what or who they were, conveniently enough. "I felt them when I was meditating earlier. I heard the whispers." He had also become obsessed with meditation and chanting with statues and smelly stuff in his free time. Since he started, he'd been attending classes less, and his girlfriend Laura had walked out on him. I started to suspect her reason was not wanting to focus more on studying, but rather the guy had just become plain weird. "Ahmed, listen up," I said, trying to bring him back to reality, but by his expression, it only irritated him further. "None of that stuff is real, bruv. You're just scaring yourself and pushing us all away at the same time." For a moment he stood there, orange reflections of the flames flicking over his tanned features and glinting off the ends of his sleek black beard. When he responded, it was in a somewhat patronizing tone. "I know it's hard to accept, but this stuff's real, and they're not even hiding it anymore. You heard what happened in Stockholm?" "Not this again," I groaned. I couldn't resist letting a meanness into my tone. One of his occult fixations had been on a riot or terrorist attack or something that came up in the news a few months before. I don't really keep up with that sort of stuff, but apparently conspiracy theories were running wild about it having some sort of supernatural origin. He kicked the ground in frustration, then started walking towards me, jabbing his finger in my direction with every word. "You could see them on the videos. They were in people's heads, making them go crazy." "Don't you point at me like that," I told him, offended and angry. He flung his arms above his head. "Oh, come on, Raquel. Take your eyes off Bart's knob for 5 bloody minutes and see the truth." "Bugger off, Ahmed." I gave him a good shove back, but it barely made a difference. Feeling incensed, I said, "And bugger off to your fairy spirit elves too." I made an obscene gesture towards the stone circle. "What are you doing, you tosser? You'll make them even angrier," he protested, running a hand through his hair and pacing back and forth in a tight arc. "Oh well, I'm sorry I made the ghosts grumpy by having a little party," I said, my tone now blatantly nasty. I was well and truly sick of his new age nonsense. "I apologise, Mr. and Mrs. Ghost," I said, climbing on top of the burial mound, "for having a few drinks." I mimed chugging down a bottle, "and having a dance with the gang." I started to dance a bit sexily, making Ahmed's eyes widen in horror and his nostrils flare with anger at the same time. "The ghosts don't like me shaking my backside? Does it make them jealous, Ahmed?" I said, and started doing my best attempt at twerking over the top of the ancient grave. I even raised my fingers and put my tongue through them in as vulgar a manner as I could muster. This seemed to push him over the edge. "Come off it, you daft cow," he screeched at me, jumping up on the stone circle and shoving me off of it. I let out a scream, stumbled, but managed to balance myself before I fell. Putting his hands on me had pushed my limits. "Fine, Ahmed," I yelled back at him. "Stay with your stupid ghosts and don't expect me to bring you on another adventure either. At this rate, they'll be your only friends." "I tried to warn you, Raquel," he growled coldly. I ignored him. "You've ruined this trip, Ahmed. Ruined it." I turned around and stormed back to camp. The yelling had attracted the attention of the gang, who were now standing up looking out at me stomp the distance between them and Ahmed's campfire. When I reached them, I said, "Bed, I think." The rest seemed to get the message. Don't ask any questions unless you want your head bitten off. I grabbed my things and went to go to my tent. "Wait up, babe," Bart called behind me, trying to catch up. I was in such a fuming huff that I didn't even get creeped out by the darkness and isolation of our tent's location. Earlier, Bart had gotten into some dumb macho argument with Barry about where best to pitch the tent to protect it from the wind. They disagreed, and so, to prove a point, Bart goes and pitches ours behind a small hillock away from everyone else's. I shredded the zip open, climbed into the sleeping bag, and jammed my eyes shut. I refused to acknowledge Bart when he came in. I was pretending to be asleep. I was so done with people, the world, friends, everything. After a point, Bart got tired of trying to get me to talk to him, never mind get frisky with him, which seemed to be what he'd been planning. He switched his phone light off and settled down. It seemed like this wasn't a night where either of us were going to get any sleep. He was tossing and turning endlessly, and I couldn't get Ahmed's words, "I warned you," from repeating endlessly in my head, just as I thought my mind was calming down enough that maybe sleep was on the horizon. I heard Bart mumbling slowly. "Oh, I thought you didn't want to play tonight, babe. Glad you reconsidered. That feels nice." What on earth was he saying? Was he having some sort of sick dream? I turned around slowly and squinted in the dark. Sure enough, the mass of his sleeping bag was moving. "Oh, I love it when you kiss up my chest like that," he sighed blissfully, and seemed to lift his covers as if making room for someone to crawl over his body. "Bart?" I whispered, trying to get his attention. "You've got the best hands. Keep doing it like that," he said, his voice breathy and barely audible. "Bart?" I said even louder. Oh, watch your nails, babe, they're a bit sharp." I went over to shake him awake. If this was something he was doing on purpose to freak me out, I was going to go through him. But he seemed to be getting somehow agitated. "Oi, let go! That bloody hurts," he complained. I hesitated and backed off a bit, taken aback by the situation. "I said let go!" he shouted, sounding very much in pain. "What are you doing, Raquel?" He began to thrash around, grunting and swearing. I clamped my hands to my mouth. "Bart!" I shouted, utterly aghast. "Get off me!" he bellowed one last time, and with a large thrust of his arms, he shoved at nothing, as if to get the air off of him. Except, he did not hit air. Like surfacing from being underwater, my entire perspective changed, and I was stuck with a sharp pain in my chest and the sense of moving through the air. This was brought to an end with my backside landing hard on the ground. Bart scrambled away from me frantically, fumbling around for his phone. He turned on its torch and illuminated the tent. He was pressed up against the corner, trying to push himself away, but he'd reached the end of the line. His bare chest was bleeding profusely from 2 hands' worth of scratch marks leading down from his chest to his groin. "What the hell is wrong with you?" he yelled at me, clearly scared out of his wits and more than a little in shock. I had no idea what to say or do. I was looking around for an explanation. Who was the perpetrator of the injuries to my boyfriend's body? Eventually, I looked down. I was topless, but still in my shorts and socks. But more alarmingly, my fingers were running red with blood. Lumps of skin had gathered on the insides of my long fingernails. "You're a psycho!" Bart spat, finding his courage as he moved past, knocking me backwards, and tore himself out of the tent, running into the darkness, yelling for the gang to wake up. "Bart, wait! It wasn't me!" I called out feebly, knowing that somehow, in some way beyond my understanding, it clearly had been me. I pulled myself out of the tent and stood up. The blackness seemed almost impenetrable, almost like a physical thing. Then there was a series of screams, followed by an animalistic snarl. "What's going on?" I yelled out to nowhere, but the noises kept coming. The growls of a monster and the terrified screams of my friends. I needed to get there. I needed to help. The adrenaline pumped through my body, driving me to action above all else. But I couldn't see. I waved my phone light on the ground, but nothing was revealed. "Where are you?" I shouted into the gloom. When I did, a pathway of visibility opened up in the thick, viscous darkness. There was no time to consider the impossibility of what I was seeing. I needed to move. I thundered along barefoot, barely aware of the chilly night air on my bare chest. The time and effort it took to climb over the hillock between our tent and the camp was gouging at my insides. The screams were only getting louder, the growls and snarls only fiercer. I felt like I was about to burst when the camp came into sight. My friends were running in all directions, torn between escape and the drive to help each other. The source of their terror was all too clear. An unnaturally large, mangy-looking wolf. It was bent over, clamping its jaws down on the throat of one of the gang. Forgetting all sense of my own safety, I ran towards it, and when I got halfway there, the anvil dropped on my head. It was Bart's neck in the beast's throat. Bart's mouth was just about opening and closing, but no air was available for him to scream. "Let him go!" I screamed, louder than I ever had before. I sounded like a harpy swallowing a clap of thunder. Then I noticed it. They were right beside Ahmed's campfire. A mad plan formed in my mind, and I bolted right towards the flames. When I got there, I grabbed a burning log and threw it at the beast. Then I grabbed another, and another. Then, causing a scorching pain in my right foot, I kicked the flaming ashes at the monster. Finally, its fur caught aflame. The thing finally noticed, panicked, and belted into the darkness over the edge of the hill, perhaps in search of a stream to jump in. "Bart, I'm here," I called, running towards my mauled boyfriend. Before I got there, I could already tell it was too late. "Stay back, psycho," came a familiar voice behind me. Then I felt strong arms grab me around the waist, stopping me moving. It was Bart. But how? Bart was lying dead in front of me, and he was behind me restraining me. Absolutely terrified and confused, I entered a blind panic. I started struggling and screaming. Colours and shapes whipped in front of my eyes, and unidentifiable sounds so loud I feared they'd burst my eardrums sawed their way through my skull. "Somebody give me some help," Bart called, barely audible through the cacophony inside my head. Then dimly, I felt other hands on my body and other voices in my ear, but then there was nothing. 3 days later, I was sitting in my dorm room with a receipt for bail from a Lancaster police station on the desk. I sat facing Bart. "He'll need plastic surgery," Bart said, his lips tight and his voice short. "And his eye?" I asked, trying to sound like I was in control of my emotions. "It's not looking good. He was burnt pretty badly. The doctor said he was a lucky boy, considering he was set on fire." I nodded, not knowing what else to say. My bandaged right foot gave me some small inkling as to the pain my friend must be going through. Bart nodded and put his backpack full of the last of his belongings on his back. "Tell Ahmed I'm sorry." Bart was silent, then he opened the door and walked out. That's my story. Believe me or don't, it's my truth. Unfortunately, it doesn't end there. Ever since that night, I've been having cases of what I think is called missing time. I lose certain hours of the day where I don't remember where I was or what I was doing, until people tell me they've seen me about, acting strangely. I'm due to go home in a week's time, and I'm concerned that if I tune out when I'm there, I might do something horrible to my parents. I'm in desperate need of help. Someone on the internet, somewhere, is bound to know what to do. I just hope that my story reaches them in time. Serious replies only, please. R.